For all its bugs, glitches, and memes over the years, Oblivion still holds a very special place for me as one of my favorite games of all time since I was a kid. I've played through all of its quests, explored its many locations, I've even tried to get rid of my biggest fan multiple times over with no luck, yet it still hasn't gotten old. It was my first true RPG experience when I was younger, and it blew my mind back when I first picked it up in 2006. But you know what would have blown my mind even more back in the day was hearing that my favorite RPG game was coming to my favorite handheld at the time, the PlayStation Portable. Yep, this is going to be a weird one. So join me as I take the journey into the unreleased and mostly unknown Elder Scrolls Travels Oblivion for the PSP, and see what it's all about. Enter the Elder Scrolls Travels, Bethesda's way of trying to shoehorn their large-scale popular RPG series onto mobile devices back in the early 2000s. It consists of 4 unique standalone games developed by Virtual Studios. Stormhold from 2003, Dawnstar and Shadowkey from 2004, and Oblivion Mobile, or the Elder Scrolls Travels Oblivion, from 2006. 3 of which were made for Java and Brew-based devices, while Shadowkey was made for the Nokia N-Gage. They were all dungeon crawler RPGs with a mixture of open and enclosed areas, mostly in a first-person perspective with the exception of Oblivion, which went to an isometric view instead. As you'd probably expect for a lineup of flip phone games, they were, well, pretty simplistic. So they didn't exactly become sought-after hits like the mainline games, but for a handful of spin-offs for some old cell phones, they did a decent enough job at creating an on-the-go Elder Scrolls experience. They would receive decent enough reception, but were usually panned for their awkward controls and low frame rates. And to be honest, calling it a frame rate here is a little generous because it feels like I'm watching a goddamn slideshow. But Bethesda wanted one last kick at the portable can for their popular RPG series, knowing full well that by 2007 they would need something a little bit more than a simple flip phone exclusive, which brings us to the PSP. So sometime in 2006, Climax Studios was tasked with development of the 4th game's newest PSP tie-in titled The Elder Scrolls Travels Oblivion. It was announced in a late 2006 issue of official PlayStation Magazine, having a projected release date of spring the following year. As 2007 came and went with little word about the game since its announcement, most retailers would start to return any pre-order deposits later that year. Due to a lack of information, the game would kinda just fade away for a while as not many people talked about it. That is until 2016, when the YouTube channel Past to Present Online uploaded gameplay footage of an early leaked build of the Travels game, which ZeniMax quickly moved to pull down. But it was too late, and the unreleased PSP game had piqued the interest of many fans, eventually leading to a total of 5 or so builds dating from 2006 to 2007 being leaked online. So, what does Oblivion on the PSP look like, you might ask? Now I'm very familiar with Oblivion, but I knew I was going to need some direction for this new PSP version. Luckily, I still got my trusty old Oblivion strategy guide to get me through it. Now right off the bat, you can see this was probably still in its early prototype stages when it was cancelled sometime around August of 2007. There's very little in the way of story elements or anything like that. It's more of a collection of levels showcasing different parts of the game as probably a sort of progress report. Sometimes you just need to load into them from this sort of debug menu. So the game begins in Ralta, an island off the coast of High Rock where I woke up to find myself locked in a prison cell. This one seems a bit familiar. A mysterious man in red robes appears, lets me out of my cell, and after a quick dialogue sequence and rather unflattering close-up, he promptly died to a flare. RIP. From there, I made my way through the prison corridors fighting the usual Oblivion creatures, scamps, the goblins from Lumbridge, and pink-robed cultists. There's not much in the way of friendly NPCs at the moment, so I'm really just hacking and slashing my way through to hopefully find my way out of these catacombs. Now you aren't given a huge selection of weapons, but you are given the basics. A typical sword and shield, bow and arrow, or magic. All accessible from the in-game menus, which look and function pretty much exactly like the menus from the mainline version. Okay, I figured I might as well get this one out of the way. You know how I usually bitch about controls in these first-person PSP games? Well, for some reason here the controls really don't feel too bad at all. The analog stick controls back and forth movement and panning side to side. Holding the right trigger allows you to strafe instead of looking around. It actually works pretty well. I don't know, maybe I'm just getting used to it. But there is a sort of auto-lock feature that especially helps for magic, which I think would be abysmal to use without it. It can't help the bow and arrow though, it's utterly useless. It does no damage and every time you're hit it cancels your goddamn attack. Anyways, I pressed on with more hacking and slashing, as well as some magicking along the way, until I ran into my first friendly NPC, an Imperial prison guard.
Stop right there, criminal scum!
She told me I needed to go to the prison chapel to get the key from the captain who's dead. You'll notice a common theme with the friendly NPCs, they're all perpetually out of breath, so they'll kinda just be breathing like their life depends on it whenever you're around them. So I hit the chapel, got the key, and managed to meet up with another guard named Fordley. Jesus Christ, these NPCs. Mr. Fordley told me we're doomed unless I can extend the bridge, which is the only way out of the prison. So I killed more bad guys, let down the bridge, and finally found my way out of this goddamn prison via an inconspicuous door, which led me right into a plane of Oblivion. Great. Now the Oblivion planes in this PSP version are more like dungeons rather than the open areas with towers like the mainline game, but the idea of closing the gate and escaping is still the same. Like I said, the story doesn't exist here, but there is some information out there about it. They're supposed to focus heavily around the Mages Guild, which the player would join soon after escaping the prison. The events were supposed to coincide with the mainline game, showing that gates were opening across Tamriel and not just in the province of Cyrodiil. It wouldn't contain an open world like the other games. Instead, it would be more linear, supposedly containing 10 levels across 5 different regions. The player could visit a sort of main hub area with all the merchants, quests, and other NPCs to interact with, and from there they'd be able to teleport to the different levels to explore or complete objectives. Anyways, back to closing this Oblivion gate. I navigated my way through, again fighting the common Oblivion bad guys who really weren't putting up much of a challenge anymore because I was basically power leveling myself through combat. Once I got to the end of Hell, I ran into Zurl, who apparently congratulated me and offered me a gift of my choice. Yoink! Now it's on to the Mages Guild, and god damn, dude. Look, I might as well talk about the game's graphics. Even though this is on a PSP, I do think it looks pretty good overall. The weapons to enemies and other stuff are all pretty well the same as what you'd expect to see in the mainline game, just with less detail for the PSP. But the character models, oh boy. Now we all know the iconic look of Oblivion's NPCs, which range from downtrodden to downright hilarious. But this PSP version, they've seen some better days, dude. Anyways, this Mages Guild lady asked me to deliver some papers downstairs because apparently she can't do it. You're the hero from Ralta, aren't you? Yeah, what's up? So I delivered her stupid papers downstairs and headed out into the Divine Square. Supposedly, this is what that main hub area I mentioned before would have been, which reminds me a bit of Cloud Ruler Temple from the main game. There's quite a few NPCs around to speak with. They'll either talk about current events or other interesting stuff. There's a merchant that sells bows at their shop, which they didn't have any of, and another one that sells melee weapons at the Great Forge. But I broke both of their inventories, so I couldn't buy anything. Now I needed a drink, so I headed over to the hub's local watering hole called the Vicarious Vixen, but it was empty. There's not much else to do here really, so I pissed around for a bit and explored before moving on to the next area, the city of Anticlur, which as you'd expect has unfortunately been overrun by all sorts of evil Daedric creatures that continuously spawned as I moved through the city. In true Oblivion fashion, with my now ludicrously overpowered character, I navigated through the alleyways, slaughtering everything in my path, making sure to grab every morsel of loot along the way even though it's pretty much worthless. Interestingly enough, even though the game wasn't going to be the same open world, it was supposed to contain the same RPG elements like having 18 of the 21 different skills from the original game, so you would still be making a character build, leveling up, and distributing skill points as usual. There isn't much to do here in the city either, so I continued on my warpath until finally reaching the end. Back to my jail cell. Other than a few more incomplete or debug levels, that's pretty much all of Oblivion's PSP edition, which kinda made me a bit sad. I can't help but feel like this PSP version would have been really cool to see back in the day had it actually gone on to become a full game. The prototype itself functions surprisingly well, and it feels like Climax really focused on getting the basic gameplay established before moving on to other parts of the game, because the gameplay itself actually feels pretty solid across the board. Since there was no official cancellation ever announced, it's hard to know exactly why the game never came to be. Supposedly it was due to the project costing too much in time or resources to be worth it, but who really knows? Now I love Oblivion. It's one of my favorite games of all time. And to be honest, this PSP version, it's not really anything to write home about. But hey, a prototype of a project as ambitious as bringing the Elder Scrolls to the PSP would have blown my mind at 7 years old, and I still think it's pretty damn cool today.